So I can really only speak about what I'm trying to accomplish as a maintainer and as a contributor. Okay, so let's dive into it. I think this isn't a technical. This is not really a technical presentation. It's really about what are the kind of things that I'm thinking about, and I think that you guys are thinking about as well. When you're building new startup cities and when we're building new protocols. So, I think it's very hard to have a conversation about, cryptocurrencies or networks without talking about like money, right? We have the kind of a standard definition of money, unit of account, medium of exchange, store of value. And that's all true, but I kind of think it as part of something larger. I think of money as a method of value exchange and ultimately as a way of social coordination, right? Like the role of money markets and prices in a society is to help determine who does what. So I really want to focus on the idea of social coordination. And I think that what we're really trying to do with social coordination is, create prosperity, right? I think when you guys are creating new cities, you guys are thinking, how do I make this a prosperous city? And when I think about prosperity, I think about it in terms of, how do we efficiently allocate our resources, whether that's land, natural resources, human capital, and how do we direct that towards, fulfilling the needs and wants of the people living in that society? And ultimately, in order to create prosperity, it requires a great deal of social coordination, right? This is for a couple different reasons. Human life cycles, right? Throughout our lives, some people at some points in your life you consume more than you produce, and other stages of your life, hopefully, you're producing more than you consume, right? Also, you know, a society gets more efficient when it has specialization, but that specialization comes at the cost of the needing to coordinate. So, I think that as startup city founders and as protocol developers, we need to think about, okay, what's really needed for prosperity. Um, so yeah, when talking about how to build a city, I think we face a lot of the same challenges, but different constraints. When you talk about a city where there's only so much land on Earth, there's some constraints about geography, constraints around natural resources, and ultimately some level of forced participation. Right? You have some people who are born into a city, who are born into a nation or a state, and migration isn't always possible. And so those are some of the constraints, and you still have to make those people happy to some extent, right? So those are some of the constraints when we're talking about, a physical network and physical cities. Whereas when we talk about decentralized, protocols, assuming I should have put an asterisk here, assuming that there's a free and open internet, decentralized protocols are almost completely opt-in. So we don't have that inertia, but we also don't have to cater to people who don't want to be a part of the network. When when I'm designing a protocol, right, or when I'm thinking about how do I make Xenon the best protocol possible, it really comes to, again, I mentioned this isn't a technical conversation because for me, the tech is really just about, you know, creating the right incentives and creating the right mechanisms. The questions that I think about are, how do we align risk and labor with outcomes and rewards, right? I think you guys are probably thinking about the same things when you talk about, okay, I got to build a new city, right? How do we enable different models of ownership? We can have strong property rights at the individual level. We can have joint ventures and companies. How do we model that? How do we model public governance for the things that are truly shared? Maybe things like air and water and so on. How do we ensure that we have stable critical infrastructure, right? For a city, we're talking things about electricity, sewage, roads, all those kinds of things. But then how do we also allow for enough room for experimentation and innovation? These are the same questions that we think about when we're designing a protocol. And I kind of really want to talk about the role of trust, because famously, I think one of Bitcoin's kind of key mottos or Satoshi's key mottos, don't trust, verify. But this is it's a two-sided coin. With verification, there's costs, there's friction, and with Bitcoin, by having your own node and you're verifying, you don't have to trust anyone at the cost of having to run your own node. Trust is efficiency, right? But trust can break. And I think when we're designing protocols, we have to think, okay, is trust necessary for prosperity, or what levels of trust are necessary for prosperity? If trust is necessary, like, when I think about the society that I live in, right, I want to be able to trust my neighbors. I want to be able to walk on the street, without, carrying a weapon all the time. Um, so, I think that high trust is something that we kind of want, but something that we can't always rely on. So how do we allow for different models of trust, and how do we mitigate the damage of broken trust? Again, I think these are some very important questions, both for startup cities and also for decentralized protocol developers. I also think about different types of economies. In the real world, I call this the constrained economy. What are we limited by in the real world? We're limited by things such as available energy. We're limited by our natural resources. The value is much more objective and governed by physics, and a lot of the constraints are supply constraints. Whereas online, especially with the advent of the digital age, the marginal cost of information replication is zero, right? There's so much content out there. It's what matters is what's the good content. We talk about the attention economy. Um, it's the constraints are a lot more on the demand side. Um, Briefly into that, right? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm not sure how scientific it is anymore, but I think it's still a good model to kind of think about, us as human beings. Um, but the important thing here I want to showcase is that I think that those bottom tiers of human wants and needs, for the most part, they can be satisfied, through the constrained economy. A lot of those things where, if you give someone enough energy to consume, they can satisfy their needs for, they can satisfy their physiological needs and their needs for safety. Whereas those upper tiers, of needs, they can't all, it's not just a function of energy, right? You can't just pump energy into someone's life and think that they're necessarily going to be happier, right? I think, for first world countries, for example, have, I think, the highest rates of suicides. And just an example, when I talk about the types of value, constrained value versus non-constrained value, as a farmer, I can only feed so many people, but as an artist, I can inspire the entire world, right? The value I'm creating as an artist is people have to like it, but it's so easily as many people as possible really are able to find value out of it. So I've talked a little bit about what I think the role of money is, and different types of economies and so on. Um, and when we talk about Bitcoin, this idea of sound money always comes into play, right? We say Bitcoin is sound money, or maybe gold has been sound money, right? And once we got off sound money, we had all these problems, in the world, and the economy start to pop up. When I think of sound money, though, it's really not as simple as supply caps and inflationary versus deflationary tokenomics or monetary policy. I think what really matters is that sound money has to match the characteristics of the transacted value. There's some idea of equivalent exchange. The money that I'm giving to you for this transaction, it should kind of match what you're giving back to me. And just as an example, and this is somewhat of a contrived example, is if I create something and I know it's going to perpetually increase in value, every single year, it doesn't really make sense for me to give it up for something that loses value each year. But if I compare that to, let's say I have something that's going to rot in a week and I have no use for it now, I'm probably a lot more likely to accept money that is going to, that's not going to lose value as quickly. It still might lose value. And so, there's this, based off of what we're actually transacting, the quality or the characteristic of the currency um, might make more sense. And when the money matches the nature of the value, there's I think there's going to be more transactions, right? If I have something expiring and there's only this kind of hard deflationary currency, it's going to be a lot harder for me to find someone who's willing to give up that currency who can make use of the thing I have. So when the money matches the nature of the value, I think we can get more transactions, we can get more efficient resource allocation, and ultimately this means more prosperity. So my assertion here is like Bitcoin is sound money, right? The Zenon community, we're not competing against Bitcoin. We have no desire to get rid of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is sound money, but I put an asterisk here. So I think it's sound money for the constrained economy, right? Bitcoin is very much centered around energy. It's secured via energy expenditure. One of the great things it does for society is that it incentivizes people to go and find, stranded sources of energy and actually increase the amount of available energy we have. It helps with our constraints, right? Technological innovation is deflationary as we as we have new research, you know the what we're able to do with our energy gets better and better, and what ultimately drives that innovation is markets and market participants. If we're talking about a Bitcoin standard, market participants, Bitcoin users and holders, they get rewarded through that deflationary technology. But ultimately, I think the question to pose is Bitcoin enough, right? Is Bitcoin sound money for this kind of digital and unconstrained economy where, as I mentioned, the marginal cost of replication is basically zero. Just an observation I have is that, I often see the Bitcoin community encouraging people to spend Bitcoin, but rational users, they hold and they spend the weaker currencies first. So, when I think about what I'm trying to do with this project, I'm really trying to, maybe fill in those parts where Bitcoin doesn't serve as a good money. Ultimately, I'm trying to build Zenon as a civilization level protocol for prosperity. So really my vision, again, this not too technical, just I guess a couple of technical things on here. Ultimately, we want to scale, we want to help scale Bitcoin and really integrate it, right? We find it to be this kind of root trustless layer. We have a few mechanisms for that, peer-to-peer swaps. We want to do things like relay merge mining. But really, I'm kind of focused on, how do we have a sound money for the digital economy? How can we have that stable and robust L1? How can we have, a, how can we have that robust L1 but have protocol level support for experimentation at higher layers? And how do we allow different models of opt-in for trust? So just again, I think this is kind of the only somewhat technical thing that I'll get into, just as an example of why I'm working on Zenon. One thing that was really appealing to me, or one thing that I thought was a really interesting design decision, is so Zenon is hybrid proof of work, proof of stake, right? I think when you look at single coin proof of stake networks where stake is governance, I would say axiomatically it's kind of built in that it's going to centralize over time, and that might be a strong assertion, but I would say that's the case because validators have to be rewarded greater than everyone else, or no one validates. So unless there is sales, unless people are actually selling, your set of validators they're going to get more rewards than other people, and so their share of the network and their share of the governance is going to just naturally increase over time. And one thing that I found very compelling about Zenon, and this wasn't my decision, this is because one of the many reasons I decided to work on the network is that Zenon uses a dual coin economy. So our validators, we have two coins, our validators only earn one coin, and to spin up new validators, it actually requires a burn of the other coin, and additional contributions are needed to actually earn the other coin. And so because of this, we have multiple different types of competitions going on to, in order to actually increase your power and increase your governance, increase your votes in the network. And so the network actually, decentralizes progressively by itself over time. And so it's kind of these kind of design decisions, and these are the kind of decisions that we're trying to build into the network. We're trying to learn from other networks and say, okay, how, what are some issues here? How can we, how can we fix that here? So again, if you guys want to learn more, you can please join our community. I'm happy to have these kind of conversations with anyone. We have no formal leadership structure. Besides the GitHub and the Twitter, kind of the legacy that our founding devs who have left us, we don't really have any sort of formal infrastructure. Anyone can come in and be a leader. We have an on-chain grant program available for anyone to apply for. Feel free to come by and say hi to me. My current focus is kind of making the incentives more continuous. So right now, the grant process, you make a grant, it takes 2 weeks. There's a little bit of friction involved. It's kind of hard for someone to maybe do something and then the next day get feedback and paid if it was something, if it was good. I'm kind of working on trying to bring that, make the feedback loop tighter. So sorry, I think that was a lot. I think I'm within time maybe, but yeah, if we have any time left over, I'm happy to take any questions.
We're going to have to close out. But again, thank you so much, George, for coming on. And everybody should see the cards. They were all on the seat. We're plastered all over the museum. So it's a very intriguing community, been heavily supportive of Build. And, as he mentioned, a civilizational level protocol bit with Bitcoin ethos in mind is something that we believe pretty strongly at Build. And it's really cool to see a infrastructure level protocol